Okay, welcome everybody. This is going to be a very in-depth and technical modding and repainting video for the Nerf pulse rifle. So you're going to want to start off and get a screwdriver and a bin to put screws and parts in. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. We are going to remove all the screws, and there are quite a few of them. Remove the magazine first, of course. Put that aside. You're going to paint that separately. No need to break that down. Let's get at these screws. Now, I will mention here that I do sell these blasters, either fully assembled, or if you send me yours, I can paint it. That's a more affordable option. But if you would just like somebody to send you a blaster with the work completely done and ready to go, just check out the links in the description for the details. Now, the screw for the battery compartment you see here in the back, that is a very special screw. Do not lose that. You will not just be able to replace that with a different screw. So you're going to want to take special care, get it out of there, just use the screwdriver, poke it out. There we go. Yep. That's a special screw. So don't lose anything you can't replace. Put it right in there. We're going to put those aside. Just remember there is another screw hiding under the pump of the grenade launcher, so you'll need to pull that back to get at it. All right, we've got the first half of the outer shell removed. Now that will still have some screws in it. You're going to want to very carefully hold it over the bin like so, and just poke it out. Just get all the screws out. There you go. Just use the bin to catch the screws. Don't want to lose any screws. Inevitably, some are going to go missing. That's okay, but you just want to make sure that you have the majority of them. You can still stitch the thing up back together pretty nicely, even if you're missing a couple of screws, but it's better to have, all of them. Okay, next we're going to get the other half off. All right, you can see I'm pulling, there's a couple of wires and components you need to be careful of, so separate the two halves very carefully. There are 4 smaller unique screws, so those are special screws as well. I don't want to lose those. The piece holding the speaker in place, those uses just regular screws. So we're going to very carefully undo those. Now, take note here, there are 2 really important pieces that you need to set aside. If you just move the other half of the shell, these can fall out really easily. These 2 buttons control the ammo counter. So you can, on this blaster, you can change the number. Its standard is 10 to reflect the darts, and it'll actually count down as you're firing. But you can get it up to 99, like in the movie. So set those buttons aside. All right, now to get the shell completely separated, we're going to have to saw through the barrel. There's a orange cap you can see here. It doesn't come off. You're going to have to cut through it. I'm just using a Dremel with a blade attachment. Make sure you wear eye protection. And you're going to very easily be able to saw through the top half. You're not going to be able to get all the way through the bottom half, however. But I'll show you how to deal with that in a minute. So just get your saw up to a nice speed. Just gently saw through the tip. It's going to leave a little bit of a mark. It's very barely noticeable once you remove the, just like that. So there'll just be a little bit of a cut. You won't be able to notice. Now take your screwdriver, and you're going to push it through the cut you made in the bottom half. Oh, got to switch this around. I need the flat end. Okay, there we go. So yeah, just get your screwdriver in the groove there, and then give it a good push. And that should break the seal. Now I have had it where the ring comes off a little bit, but if the ring comes off, you can very easily reattach it with glue. Just note that if you're going to take your pulse rifle to a convention of any kind, you're going to take it out in public. In a lot of states, it is the law that it must have orange tips. And this is, of course, for your own safety. Even though this is clearly a prop of some kind, you don't want to take any chances. All right, now there are a couple of other screws that you can only get at after you've removed the other half of the shell. So we're getting at those now. All right, we're completely separated, and the cut we made worked. Now we can lift off the other half. There we go. We're going to do the same thing as before. We're going to collect some screws. Yeah, just gently tap those out. They usually come out on their own. If you need to use the screwdriver, you can just give them a good poke, and they will drop right out. This is just a good way to stay organized. Keep all your pieces in one place, as you don't want to just kind of do it willy-nilly, because the pieces will definitely all get separated, and you'll be chasing screws. You'll be crawling around on the floor. Using a box, just common sense. All right, now note that the pump is held on with a special screw. The pump comes in 2 halves. So we're just going to unscrew that and make sure to set that special screw aside. There's one, of course, on the other half of the blaster shell as well. So just, yeah, there we go. Put the screw and the other half of the pump in your bin. Okay, next we are getting into the internals. I'm going to be very detailed here because there's a lot that can go wrong if you don't know what you're doing. And we're going to start with the front end. Here we have the grenade launcher. Now, this has a couple of particular quirks. I'll go through the one that you're going to probably run into the most often is properly seating this mechanism. So notice this lever there. Here's the trigger assembly. I'm just going to put that in there. All right, let's just go over, I'll give you a quick rundown on basically how this works. So here it is fully assembled. You can use this as a visual reference. Feel free to pause the video. That'll help you get a good feel for what it looks like, what it's supposed to look like when it's fully reassembled. So now an important thing to note is the way that this works is you pull the trigger and it makes that lever move up. That's what causes it to fire. Now there's a problem with this design because this latch back here, if it is not pulled up like that, so you have to push it down like that, that will properly seat the mechanism. That's just something that you'll notice is that latch needs to be up before you can seat the mechanism. Also, just test the trigger a little bit, make sure it works. The spring, make sure the spring is forward of this plastic section where you can see it right here. Just note that the spring needs to be forward. It has a tendency to move back and get caught where it's not supposed to. Okay, now we're going to just disassemble the grenade launcher assembly. Just going to take this apart. Put those aside. Just put those in the bin. Okay, now one little important piece. This helps hold the trigger in place, but you need to remove it very carefully because there's a little spring in there, and if you're not taking it out properly, that spring is going to just go flying off. You're going to lose it. It's going to go into another dimension, so be super careful. To put it back in, make sure the flat face is pointing out, not the rounded face. Just make sure that flat side is looking at you, and then just depress the spring and gently insert it back into that slot. Be very, very careful because that spring will go flying and then you'll be like, well, crap. Take that aside very carefully and put it in your bin. Okay, remember, you just have to get the other half of the pump off. So we're going to remove that screw and put that in our bin. All right, now we're going to move to the trigger assembly. This has several parts. Make sure you're keeping these, setting these aside. I'm going to go over how this all works. So here you have the charging handle. The charging handle, when you push it in, it's going to push that down, and that is going to cause the flywheel to spin. So that's going to charge up your flywheel, so you'll be able to launch darts. Now the trigger. Sorry for all the camera shaking. I'm bumping into the tripod. So now, as you can see, you won't be able to fire unless a magazine is inserted. There's a special arm there that lets the gun know that there's a magazine in it. I'll just separate that out and I'll show it to you quickly. So as you can see, as the magazine is inserted, it presses this switch right here. So we're going to take that out. Now this switch is particularly tricky. It needs to be pressing against that orange bit at the top. This is what is going to launch your darts. It basically just pushes them into the flywheel. There's also a canal there where the wires are supposed to go, and that's a very dangerous area because if your wires aren't laid properly, they will get cut in half as you reconnect the shells. I've had that happen before. It totally sucks because you can't just replace the wires. So you have to be very, very careful when you're rejoining the two halves. All right, now we are going to move all the electronics to protect them while we're painting. I just use a small Ziploc bag. So yeah, here you go. I've used this a ton. You can just reuse the same bag over and over. You can see it's got a little paint on it. So what you're going to do is just get all your electronics there, put them in a bag, and then just zip the bag closed enough so those will stay in there. And that'll keep everything protected. For this next bit, you are going to need a hand sander. I like to use 120 grit sandpaper. Okay, important safety tip here. You're going to want to use a good respirator. There's going to be a lot of plastic dust. I shouldn't have to say this, but you do not want to breathe in plastic dust. And same for spray paint. All right, here we go. Now I'm going to show you how I weather my blasters. So I use a little bit of silver polish paint called Rub and Buff. You're going to want to work the edges, and the trick with weathering is just a little bit will do. You don't want to overdo it. If you overdo it, it's just not going to look authentic. I try to follow the edges, and I try to wear down anything that looks like it would be used, either be maintained or polished. So things like triggers or handles or anything like that, that's going to look very used. Okay, here we have a side-by-side of before and after the weathering. You can really see that a little goes a long way. I think this looks really great. It's very minimal. I'll show you how I do the front end here. Just very carefully trace around these eyelets you see. And again, use the paint sparingly. This particular paint, it has a tendency to stick the second you put it on, and you can't, once it's on there, you can't get it off. So be very careful. And just try to very gently trace these lines out for the eyelets. It looks great when it's finished. Really, really pops against the black. You're going to mess up in one or two little places, and if you apply a little too much paint, that's fine. But just remember, less is always more in the case with weathering. All right, we're going to do the trigger. Okay. The handle, I imagine, is some kind of polymer, so I usually don't wear down the handle. The idea is that, we want to give it the weathering effect because the idea is that the paint is worn off from use, exposing the metal underneath. Okay, now this is the other side. Now I've put the paint on the ejection port for the grenades and the action on the or the bolt or whatever that is, wherever the bolt mechanism moves back and forth. I've weathered that. All right, now we've got the internal components. We've spray painted and worn these down as well. So we have the buttstock, we have the grenade trigger, we have the main trigger, we have the charging handle. Okay, now we are ready to reassemble. So there are 5 switches. The grenade switch right there. Make sure that's in place. Each one has a little holder. That one is for the machine gun sounds. That one's for the, I believe those 2 are for the flywheels. And the magazine switch, I think it just tells the system that there's a magazine loaded. Now, just be careful about how your wires are laid out. Again, when you rejoin the 2 halves, you don't want anything not where it's not supposed to be, because that will cut the wires. If something is sticking out where it's not supposed to be and you put the 2 halves back together, well, you're gonna run into trouble pretty quickly. All right, remember that top switch needs to be resting on top of that orange bit right on top. It's a little tricky. So you just have to kind of push them together and make sure they are touching. So that orange knob on the top should be depressing that switch as it sits in its place. All right, now there's a special slot for that board or chip or whatever that is. So you're going to want to look for that slot and make sure that you put it properly in its place. All right, our trigger assembly fell out here, as you can see. Very, very common thing. We'll just have to replace that. Just reseat it. Okay. There we go. Very nice. Yeah, that slot is tricky. Takes a little finesse, but there you go. All right, now we are ready to reinstall the speaker, ammo counter, and ammo counter control. So you're going to get your speaker right in there, like so. You got to mess with it a little bit to get it right back where it needs to be. This orange piece here, it can get a little tangled in the wires, so just mess with it a little bit and make sure it comes out cleanly. So we're just going to grab a couple of standard screws. All right, we're going to put the buttons back first. Okay, put the small screws back on the ammo counter. All right, we put the ammo counter control screws back on. Make sure those buttons are in there. All right, now we're screwing the orange piece that holds the speaker back in. Okay, gotta move the wires a little bit. Okay, there we go. Good. Now we're all set. And yes, I realize I see that orange wire. I know. I fixed that. I fixed that later. You don't want that to happen. That's a perfect example of what I was talking about. If your wires are not placed properly and you screw this thing back together, the pressure will chop wires in half, and then you'll have a broken blaster. So be very careful. Okay, now you can see by pressing these three switches, you can activate the firing mechanism. You want to have some C batteries handy. You're going to need 4. So at this point, I put the batteries in and I just test all the electronics. Just if you want to know the electronics are working, just press the grenade switch. That doesn't need anything. Like, you don't have to cock the grenade launcher to activate that system. You just press that button there right below the flywheels. Just making sure our wires are looking good. All right. Don't forget to put on the jam clearing door. So we've painted and weathered that as well. And put that back in before you do anything else. All right, now we can work on putting the grenade launcher back together and the trigger assembly. So it looks like we're going to start with the trigger assembly. And we'll quickly review how the trigger assembly works again, just so you know what you're doing. So you need these 4 pieces. Okay, here I am putting the mag switch upside down like an idiot. Okay, there we go. Got it right side up. All right, now remember, when the magazine's in, it's going to press that button. All right, now we've got the charging handle lever. We're putting that back in. So remember, when the charging handle is pushed, it's going to push that lever down. It's going to press that button. That's what's going to charge the flywheels. I'm screwing around with the trigger when really I meant to, get the charging handle. Okay, so the charging handle there. The charging handle, as you can see, it has a little groove it sits in, so relatively easy to put that back in. You're going to want to be careful to keep all of this together as you are reassembling, because if even one piece comes loose, that means you have to take the whole thing apart again and put it back together properly. So don't move this too much when you are reassembling. Try to keep it flat and don't move it. Okay, now this is why I'm a big advocate of taking the whole thing apart. Some people just like to spray their whole blaster without assembling it, but I think getting at this tube is incredibly important. So painting that tube black really, really helps, because otherwise you're going to have this orange tube underneath your barrel shroud, and it's not going to look good. Okay, remember, keep that spring forward. This is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier. That spring needs to sit just right. As you can see, if the spring is going too far back, then it will not cock properly. You won't be able to fire. Okay, we've got the grenade blaster assembly all together there. Now all we need to do is just add the trigger, and that has its own kind of little groove. It's a little tricky. It can stick out inappropriately, but if you just find the groove and you put a little pressure on it. Test it as well. Make sure that that is pushing that up. The trigger will push that up. Test it a few times. Make sure that that is working properly. Okay, there it is. This is perfect. All right, just testing that lever there to make sure. Okay, everything's great. Looking really good. All right, now the front bit, just put that in last. Also, before you do any of this, make sure you reattach the other half of the pump. You can see I've already gone ahead and done that here. The pump handle has been reattached to this other half. Okay, so checking our wires, making sure everything's good. Everything is where it should be. We're going to bring back the other half of the shell. Okay, we're going to get that on there. Now, before you start putting screws back in, you're going to want to test fire and make sure everything is working properly. So just give the give this a pump. Okay, that is working. All right. Good trigger pulls. We are all set. Now we're going to just put a magazine in there. That is the sound we love to hear. We are good to go. All right, don't forget to put the buttstock back in. That can be a little tricky. It sits under the battery compartment. Now there are a bunch of screws, remember, that we have to put back in before we put the other half of the shell, outer shell, the shell right here, putting it back on. All right, looking good. Now there are some longer screws that are going to go through the carrying handle. So if you notice you have a few longer screws, just make sure that you're putting them in those top sections where the hand handle is. All right, and hey, voila, we're done. There she is. What a beauty. All right, now I like to customize my blasters with some decals. And if you're not familiar with using contact paper, I'm just going to simply show you how contact paper works. I like adding a lot of graffiti. I think it just adds a lot of character. You know, you didn't see a lot of graffiti on the weapons besides Drake's in the film. Didn't see a lot of graffiti on the pulse rifles, unfortunately. But I always like adding a little bit to mine. So you're going to apply the contact paper, okay? And then very slowly, you're going to peel the contact paper off. So these are vinyl decals. The back of them has it's like a sticker. It's very sticky. So I like to just have a razor blade or something handy. So as I'm gently lifting up, I can push the decal down onto the surface. Just making sure it's sticking just right. Sometimes it's a little stubborn. It doesn't want to come off the contact paper, but as you are carefully just pulling it up. All right. Give it a couple taps. Okay, there we go. You know, slow is the way to go. Slow and steady wins the race here. Because if you just try to, just yank it off like it's going to just stick, that's not going to happen. And you'll probably end up only applying half of the decal. And you're going to be frustrated because then, well, you're going to need another decal. So, patience. It pays to be very patient. Okay, we're almost done. That T sticking up a little bit. All right. Boom, there we go. We're just going to hit the whole thing with a little clear coat, and this blaster is ready to go. So I use camouflage, Krylon flat camouflage paint. That's the green, I believe. No, this is the green. Yeah, so I use brown. I use green. I use matte black for the rest. And a little bit of flat clear crystal clear coat. And again, for the weathering, I use Rub and Buff silver polish. And there you have it. That is how you repaint and mod the blaster. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, following the channel, or commenting. All those things are a huge help and will encourage me to make more videos. Now, until next time, game on.